All right, so we're back with another session from our Oracle Ace virtual conference. We have here with us today Lucas Jellema, who's an Oracle Ace Pro. Lucas, thank you for being here. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Well, I of course hope I can live up to the expectations. Nice to be with you all again. It has been a while. In this session, I'm going to talk about one of the most basic services in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, the object storage service. And even though it's maybe not the most flashy of services, it actually is a very important one. And there's more to it than you may realize. That's why I opted for this particular topic. Very briefly about myself. I'm currently in the Netherlands. I'm from the Netherlands. I work as CTO at Conclusion. It's an ecosystem of companies that used to include Amis. You may know me from Amis. I've been in IT since '94 when I started with Oracle. And after I left Oracle, I've been in the ACE program since 2005, and I've been working on Oracle Cloud since 2015. It wasn't called OCI at the time, by the way. So in this session, I'm going to talk about saving 500% on money and energy, and actually even more than that, and about enforcing regulatory obligations regarding data. Or to talk about providing exactly the right access to data, which of course is data on object storage. And I'm also going to briefly introduce the OCI File Explorer, a very simple tool that I built myself that I'm sharing with you, that makes use of some of the features of object storage that I'm talking about. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use object storage as probably the cheapest, greenest, and simplest database of them all. Not for all use cases, obviously, but for some. So you are probably aware of the storage tiers. Not all storage is created equal. And by picking the right storage tiers, you can save on money, on time, and on energy, and thereby on CO2 emissions. So OCI Object Storage offers 3 storage tiers. The standard one, which you will use if you don't do anything special. And then there's the tier for infrequently accessed items, and there's the archive tier. Obviously, on archive, you don't put the things that you need all the time. But if you have things that you want to retain, that you have to retain, but don't need very frequently, then archive tier is right there for you. So here are some of the things that you should know about each of the tiers. The standard tier, the highest cost, archive tier, the lowest cost, a specific retention time, a fee for retrieval for the infrequent access. You can't say it's infrequently accessed and then access it all the time. That will come at a cost. And there's a difference in availability. But what you're probably most interested in is to know about the difference in cost. And here you go. To store data on object storage for a month will cost you for 100 gigabytes about $2.50 on the standard tier, and less than 10% of this on the archive tier. Again, you will only put things on archive tier if you don't need them very frequently. It can take up to an hour before the first byte of whatever you have stored on the archive tier starts downloading. But for things that you don't need all the time, like your backups, like things that you need to retain for regulatory reasons, you don't really need all that often, then the archive tier is perfect. It's very easy to get things onto the archive tier, by the way. It's just something that you can define on an object or on all the objects in a bucket. And you can make use of object lifecycle management and even auto-tiering. So with the object lifecycle management, you define rules that will automatically manipulate the objects on our OCI Object Storage. And they can be manipulated really in 2 ways. Either they are moved to a different storage tier, typically to a cheaper one, so from standard to infrequently accessed or from standard to archive, or objects can be deleted altogether. Specific versions of objects or the object entirely. And you can define these rules for objects, for the latest version of an object, or for previous versions of objects. You may not even have realized that on object storage you can have multiple versions of an object. Well, you can, and you can handle them in different ways. You can define specific filters in your rules to indicate what type of object or what situation of the object the rule should act upon. So a specific type of object, a number of days since the last time it was modified or the day it was created, or whenever a specific version transition takes place. That might be a trigger for the rule to, for example, after 30 days, remove an object version, an older version altogether, or to move an object to the archive storage tier. When you enable auto-tiering on a bucket, only for buckets that don't have the lifecycle rules, if you enable auto-tiering on a bucket, then objects larger than 1 megabyte will automatically be moved to a lower access tier if they are not accessed frequently. So you will automatically save money by just switching on auto-tiering. What's stopping you? And maybe nothing is stopping you, and you're already doing it, of course. So cold storage, like the OCI archive tier, can use 70 to 90% less energy than hot storage. Because the cold storage doesn't need to be cooled. That's actually true. It doesn't need to be cooled. And hot storage does need to be cooled. Whether you can achieve this, of course, depends on the access patterns for the specific objects that you're putting on object storage. Now, there are some really cold storage options, but they are still in the lab. For example, Microsoft with the Silica project is looking at storing data in glass, and it's really intriguing. When it happens, it would be great. For the moment, it's just in research. And then there's the option to store data in structures that are created just like human DNA, because these structures are extremely stable and can be read many times, can be stored for decades, centuries, millennia. But of course, that also is still in the research stage. And then in the past, there was something called the kipple. What you are looking at is an object that holds a lot of data in small little knots, all kinds of threads, and all kinds of colors. Unfortunately, we can't read it. We know there's data there, but we can't decipher it. So you may have to deal with specific rules regarding data retention. You may have to save invoices for 7 years. You may have to retain your tax forms for 10 years. You may have specific rules that state that data cannot be deleted before a certain moment in time. And this is something that Oracle OCI Object Storage can automatically do for you. So you can define the data retention rules, and as long as the rule hasn't expired, as long as the object should still be retained, it will be retained, and you can even lock the rule, which means you can't break it, which means no one can remove that specific object. After that's what I said, retention rules can be locked. Even when an object is under a retention rule, it could still be moved to a cheaper tier, by the way. So if it's on standard tier, you say it must be retained for 5 years, it can still be moved to the archive tier where it will sit for 5 years. And then because the retention rule, after 5 years, it will automatically be deleted. Before the 5-year term is up, it cannot be deleted. So it will be retained because you have to. That's the reason why you would set the retention rule in the first place. So accessing objects in OCI Object Storage and how to make sure that people can access what they should access, cannot access what they should not access. Well, a fairly recent new feature in object storage is the ability to define a private IP address to access a bucket or multiple buckets instead of accessing it through a public API. A public IP address. So this is fairly new, and it allows you more control and more sovereignty, if you like, about access to your object storage. And then, as of March of this year, there's the ability to define fine-grained access control rules for OCI object storage down to the object level, in addition to the bucket level that we had before. And for each object or each set of objects that you can identify, that you can specify using wildcards. You can indicate if the policy concerns reading, writing, overwriting, deleting. Well, you can see it on the screen, and you can grant these policies to specific users. So down to the object level itself and specific permissions regarding the object level, you can define these permissions. Encryption, not going to say a lot about encryption, but we're all talking about data sovereignty all the time. It's our data and no one else should be able to access it. Well, all data in object storage is always encrypted, but if you don't do anything specific, it's encrypted using keys managed by Oracle, which may be perfectly fine. But you can also define that the data should be encrypted using your own keys. So you can provide keys either during the upload of the data or store keys in OCI Vault, and then indicate that a bucket should be encrypted using these keys. So that means that only you can decrypt the data and not even Oracle. And then this feature that has been around for a while, but is really extremely powerful, the Pre Authenticated Request URL. In OCI Object Storage, you can create a URL, a Pre Authenticated Request URL, which you will get as a URL, which provides direct access to a bucket or to specific objects in a bucket. And if you have that URL, you can access the objects. You don't need any additional authentication. You don't need to make specifically signed OCI API calls as you normally would if you want to access anything on OCI. If you have the URL, you can do plain HTTP requests, perform get, post, and put, and directly go to the objects on the object storage. So beware, anyone with the URL can access it, which can be a blessing, which can make life very easy, is also a danger. Don't leak the URL. So any HTTP client, which includes curl or any static web application, which I will demonstrate momentarily, will be able to get to the objects on object storage. Just like you make any HTTP call. It's really very simple. I will have a very simple code example a little bit later on. For your pre-authenticated request URL, you can define an expiry date. So it's only valid for a certain period of time. And even if you have specified an expiry date, you can still revoke it at any time. So if it has served its purpose, just get rid of it. When the creator of the PAR no longer has the permission the PAR requires, so the creator of the PAR no longer can access the bucket that the PAR provides access to, the PAR doesn't work anymore, which makes sense. Otherwise, you could sort of grant yourself something that lives beyond your actual permissions. In the PAR, you can define a combination of read objects, write objects, and list objects for any object pattern, or a bucket. In doing so, you can even publish a static web application on OCI Object Storage, provide a PAR for the folder that holds the static web application, provide read access, and then you get a URL on which the application can be accessed. A little bit like GitHub Pages, but then from OCI Object Storage. So here's how to create a pre-authenticated request URL. You're looking at a screenshot from OCI Object Storage console at a specific bucket. The bucket is called ToDrive, and on the left side, I can click on pre-authenticated requests. Then I can click on create pre-authenticated request, and I can define a name. I can define the access type, in this case, read and write, and also enable object listing. It's defined on a bucket. It could be defined on an object or an object with a prefix pattern. And then I will get the URL. And you have to copy that URL. That's your PAR. That's what you can hand out. This is your only chance to get it, by the way. If you close this window, it's gone. So you have to hang on to it. Well, using that pre-authenticated request URL, that allows me to, through simple HTTP requests, go into OCI Object Storage to get files, to get a list of files, even to upload files. I was able to create a very simple static web application. I've called it the OCI File Manager, and it allows you in a UI, a simple static web application that's running in your browser, to look at the contents of OCI Object Storage, to look at the contents of buckets. And maybe this is a good time to give you a very short demo. So now you're looking at the OCI File Manager, and you're looking at the contents of a bucket. Actually, there's the bucket. So this is looking at the OCI Object Storage console. Here you see the contents of a bucket, and here's the OCI File Manager, and you're looking at the same information. I can open the folder. And what I wanted to show you is I can upload a file, and I'm going to upload the slides for this very session. So there we go. Oh, the file is open, so I can't upload. That's a pity, didn't think of that. This is an earlier version. Going to send the file to the bucket. So at this point, the file was uploaded from my laptop to my browser. The browser sent an HTTP request, a put request to the pre-authenticated request URL. And we can see here that the file has arrived. When I look at the bucket and I refresh, I can see the presentations folder, and I can see the file that I've just uploaded. In my time zone, well, this is UTC, you can see it's a file that was just added. And now I'm also going to share it with you. So I'm going to share this folder. If you would now use this QR code, it would give you direct access by using my pre-authenticated request URL. It will give you direct access to the folder that holds this particular presentation. So you can download my slides using this QR code. And I didn't give you access to OCI. I didn't even give myself access to OCI. I'm just using this R feature. Back to the presentation. Well, this is what the OCI File Manager looks like. This is what you can do with it. So you can share files. I'm actually using it all the time on my phone to push photos into my OCI bucket. And then, of course, I can access these photos on any other device. It's a Vue 3 application. It's running on GitHub Pages, but I could also publish it on OCI, as I just mentioned, using a pre-authenticated request URL. Then again, as you probably are aware, OCI Object Storage also has an S3 compatible API, and you can fairly easily use any S3 compatible tool to also browse the contents of your OCI Object Storage. This is not something that you can easily share, and you have to install a tool for it, but it's something that you could do. And here are some of the steps that you would have to go through in order to get, for example, this particular tool to work, the S3 browser. Then finally, when we're talking about applications and data analysis, it seems like we're talking more and more about making a split between storage and compute, one of the core tenets of the whole Snowflake offering. So in many cases, your web application might need a proper database, a complete Oracle database or an Oracle NoSQL database. But there are situations where, yeah, you may want to use a data store. There are data behind your application, but the data is mostly read. It's changed only very infrequently, and it's not all that much data to begin with. In these cases, perhaps you don't need a proper database. Perhaps in these cases, using OCI Object Storage as your database platform is quite enough. So If this is the case, if your requirements are, well, data should be available, but the interaction with the data itself is fairly simple, usually read and only simple change operations. The data changes must be persisted, so I need durable. The changes from different users should not interfere with each other. That should not read interface, but interfere. It should be isolated. Changes are recorded automatically. Data storage should be cheap and use very little energy. Well, that's not easy to get from a proper database. And ideally, I don't need any server-side programming. And this is something you can get with OCI Object Storage using the Pre Authenticated Request URL feature. So it's easy to create an application that reads JSON files from a bucket on OCI Object Storage and gets its data through those JSON files. And also images, by the way, if it needs images. It's also fairly easy to allow that same application using that same pre-authenticated request URL to put objects to the bucket. So any change can also be sent to OCI, can be stored in the bucket, and then can be retrieved later on. So what you might do is have your JSON files to start with. Then any change that may be required can be put to the bucket in an HTTP request in a Delta file. And whenever the application reads its data, it first reads the base JSON files, then all the Delta files. It's a bit like the redo log of the Oracle database, and merges them together, and then has access to the entire dataset. Well, sometimes you probably want to merge the Delta files into the JSON files. This is something that you could do server-side. You could also do it from the client side if you make sure that you do it in exclusive mode. So here's an example of a simple application I created. It's called Bubble Tip, and it provides tips for nice destinations, nice restaurants, and nice hotels for a bunch of friends of mine. It's running again on GitHub pages. It has a backend, a data store on OCI Object Storage, and all the interaction is through HTTP. So data is read with GET requests. Any new tips that are added in the application by any of my friends that's using it on their own computer, any change is stored as a Delta file, a JSON format Delta file on the bucket on OCI Object Storage. So this is my only code example. It's both JavaScript. On the left side, it's how you get a file using the pre-authenticated request URL from OCI Object Storage. And on the right is how you save a file. And you can see it's extremely simple. If you have any experience with JavaScript, then this should be very familiar to you. So in this case, the bubble tip, it has its own bucket. In the bucket are the data file, the main data file, the bubble.json, and a folder with Delta files. And sometimes I consolidate all the Delta files together. Here are the Delta files. The last one is from last Friday, and it contains a tip on a restaurant in Barcelona. And this Delta file resolves to this information in the application. So this is the tip derived from the Delta file, and the Delta file was created from the web application using the pre-authenticated request URL last Friday. And that brings me almost to the end of the presentation. Actually, this is, of course, the last slide. Get more for less from OCI Object Storage. It's a great service, and you should give it a second glance. It allows you to save up to 1,000% in money and energy. It helps you enforce regulatory obligations. It helps you define the exact right access rights. And then using pre-authenticated request URL, it's easy to create a tool like the File Explorer to get hold of files in a simple static web application, and even use object storage as your data store for web applications, and run your static web applications from OCI Object Storage as a web server. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.